Hey, it's Mo Bunnell, your business development expert, author of The Snowball System, and your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. I got a really interesting idea from one of our audience, from someone in our audience. And she said, man, I am loving these interviews with people like Kelly O'Hara and James Clear. I can't wait to get the ones you've told me about with Michael Hyatt, Dan Pink, ridiculously interesting people and thought leaders of in very unique ways, all of them. And I am so excited about those kind of folks. And she was too. But she said, I would be really interested in hearing from you interviewing someone who's just an incredible business developer themselves, one of your clients. And gosh, boy, did that put pressure on me, because with people like Kelly and James and Dan and Michael and folks like that on the show, I've got to pick the best of the best. So we've trained over 15,000 people at Bunnell Idea Group at over 400 organizations. And the first person to come to mind, the very first person, is who you're going to meet today. His name's Mike Deimler. He is at the Boston Consulting Group. If you don't know BCG, they pretty much invented strategy consulting. And Mike plays at the highest level when it comes to strategy. He works with the largest organizations in the world, the most complex, and he personally advises the CEOs at those organizations. He's got one foot in delivery. He's got one foot in relationship building, just like you do. And he does it at a level that is rarely seen. He was the first person that came to mind when I thought, I want to have somebody I know deeply and have worked with on the show that's a practitioner of the kind of things that we teach. So we are going to have an awesome time with Mike. I just taped the episode. I had really high expectations, and Mike did not disappoint. It was better than I even thought it would be. I can't wait to introduce you to Mike. Hey, one last thing though. If you haven't gone over to bdhabits.com, B for business, D for development, bdhabits.com, make sure you do that, because that's where you're going to get a free mini course with tools, with frameworks, with downloads, with videos, with how-to steps on how you can have the right business development habits. So go to bdhabits.com, check it out, sign up. It is going to give you tons of value. All right, let's get into it with Mike and hear what he has to say on his secrets to success for business development. Here we go. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Good morning.
I think this is funny because we live, a half mile from each other, and we're taping.
We're taping. Exactly. We're taping, and we're a stone's throw away from each other.
I know.
It's a crazy world.
I know. It is a crazy world right now, but this will be a great production quality for everybody. Well, let me introduce our audience to you, Mike. Not only am I excited about this show just because I like you and your family so much, but you bring so much technically to this conversation. At this point in the season on BD Habits, Business Development Habits, we've heard from Kelly O'Hara, where we applied world-class athletic skills to the habits it takes to be successful professionally. We talked to James Clear and used his atomic habits model and applied it specifically to business development. So folks, if you haven't listened to those, go back and listen to those episodes. And I got an idea from one of our listeners, a close friend, and he said, man, I would love to hear from somebody that is in the trenches doing business development themselves, a professional, a hybrid, somebody with one foot with a deep expertise, one foot in that and one foot in having to work with clients and bring in engagements and things like that and really have the hybrid role. So that put some pressure on me, Mike, because I had to think through these over 15,000 people we've trained at Bunnell Idea Group and think, who's the best? Who's on my short list of the very best on the planet? And you have won that award to be the person that came to mind first. Are you flattered? There's a big trophy, I guess. I need to send you for that.
If I'm on your short list, that's a good list to be on for sure.
I love it. And but you bring a lot of technical chops, a ridiculous amount. Not only have you served as the global leader of BCG's strategy practice, the firm that invented strategy consultants globally. You've led that. You work with several Fortune 500 CEOs on a global basis, advising them on their strategy. You've been the editor of 2 BCG books on strategy. You currently lead innovation, in fact, sort of strategy, or a chunk of it for BCG internally, right? So like you've been thinking about strategy for a very long time. And I think this year's even your 30th anniversary at BCG. Is that right?
It is 30 years this year. Incredible.
Yeah, I love it. Well, with all that said, and I think what's fun about this call is digging into some of your philosophies. So what's super cool for the listeners is they're going to be able to hear directly from you 3 big chunks of content. One is how you take the strategic view. The second is, I love your name for this, more judo, less karate. And the third piece is moving without the ball. And we're going to get to those in a minute. But as our listeners know and our viewers know, we have such ridiculously successful people in the show that it would be easy for somebody to say, well, they're great. They've done a lot, but I couldn't do what Mike does. Like, I don't even work with CEOs, or I don't work with huge organizations, or gosh, I haven't been out this 30 years. So I ask everybody to share a moment in their life where things were difficult. And you and I've prepped like crazy for this. You know the story I'm going to ask you to share. You've never shared this broadly, but go for it. When was a time things were difficult?
Yeah, I'm happy to share a story. But before I share a story, I want to say something important.
Okay.
Which is, today is June 21st, 2020. And apart from being a Sunday, it's Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to you and to me. We're both fathers. And I know for both of us, that's, job one, right, in our lives. So it's an important day. I was reflecting a little bit, Mo, on being good at relationship development and business development is a lot like being a good father, honestly, right? So you think about fathers. Mothers are born with a certain sort of innate maternal instinct, but fathers have to learn a lot of the behaviors, right? And I think a little bit like business development, these are learned behaviors we're going to talk about. People can learn how to do these things as surely as you can learn how to be a father. And when you're unsure, which I was many times as a father, if you just follow your heart and your head at the same time, you'll usually make the right decision. So, we'll come back to that in some of our content lessons, but I thought I'd be remiss not to wish you a happy Father's Day and say being a great business development person is a lot like being a great father. It's imperfect, but if you do your best and you go at it, the good things tend to happen.
Well,
anyway, okay. So with that in mind, my story also involves my father, at least a part of the story. But Mo, I think, as I thought about sort of things in life that have shaped who I am as a person, but also in the business world, some of it is about personality. Some of it is about how you were nurtured in your family. Some of it can be learned behavior. And some of it is just about events in your life that shape who you are, right? And so my event takes me back to 1973. It was a Saturday night on a cold winter day in December, and I was 9 years old. And we just finished dinner, and me and my 2 older brothers, you can remember that age, right? Being, between ages 9 and my oldest was 14. We would tussle and play after dinner on a Saturday night. So we all went to the basement. Actually, my 2 older brothers went first, and I trailed behind them like the little brother would. And I find them down there playing with archery, childhood sort of archery game. And they had targets up in the basement, and they were shooting the targets. Well, one of the targets was a prized possession of mine, so I wasn't about to have that. So I thought, well, I can't put up with that. So I went to the end of the basement. I picked up this piece of artwork that I had made. And I said, "You cannot shoot at this. Do not shoot at this." And my brother, not trying to hit me, but my brother trying to scare me like a big brother would, shot the arrow off to the side. Unfortunately, our basement was concrete. So this arrow ricochets off a wall, hits me in the eye. And, of course, the body has a wonderful way of putting you into shock when something terrible happens to you. So you don't remember the pain, but you remember it's almost like you're frozen in time. You remember everything that happens to you. So my father, here we are, Father's Day, my father comes running downstairs. I remember him just whisking me up and running up the stairs. And, you have these memories of your father. My father's 85, but for me, he's frozen in time as this, 39-year-old with strong arms, whisking me up the steps. And my mother was a nurse. So I have these vivid memories of my mother sort of, helping me and trying to make sure I didn't die. Honestly, I was at some risk of dying. So off they take me to the hospital. And long story short, I learned later, Mo, that had this arrow been 1 millimeter further, and it hit me just a millimeter closer or deeper in my eye, it would have hit my optical nerve and I would have died. I'd be dead. Had my mother not been a registered nurse, I could have gone into such severe shock that I would have died on the living room floor of our little house in suburban Baltimore. So, after a couple of weeks in the hospital and a couple of surgeries, we had the surgeon of the Baltimore Oriole surgeon try to save my eye. There was no saving it. So I remember after 2 surgeries, this wonderful surgeon, Dr. Coleman, Stan Coleman. It's amazing the things, you remember on these pivotal, something's pivotal when you remember every detail. I remember him coming in and saying something very important to me, which was, I've got some good news and some bad news. The bad news is I'm pretty much the best surgeon in Baltimore, and I can't save your eye. That's the bad news. But the good news is God gave you 2 of them, and you only need 1. So you're going to be fine. You're going to be just fine. And so, he was right. The moral of the story is he was right. And beyond that, people often ask me sort of, what's my mojo? I mean, I think there's a presumption that people who are particularly good at relationship development or business development have a mojo. And maybe that's true. Maybe there's something, if the mojo is something you draw on, then I think it's certainly true for me. And I think the lesson was this. At some point when I was in the hospital, a family friend gave me a gift. He came in. It was the father of my best friend as a 9-year-old. And he gave me this gift just before I left the hospital. And after my surgeon had given his speech, and he gives me this gift, and I unwrapped this gift, and it was a solid gold pocket watch. He hands me this watch, and he says, he goes, this is not I didn't want to get you a toy. He goes, I didn't want to get you something for a child because you're not a child anymore. And he goes, so I want you to keep this watch, and I want it to be a marker of time, because at this point forward, you have a choice to make about how you're going to live the rest of your life. There was Mike before the accident, and there's Mike after the accident. So I have this pocket watch. It's up in keep it up in my master bedroom, and I periodically pull it out to remind me of that. And I think, the lesson for me that has driven me in life is that you have a decision to make. You can either be angry about something like that, or you can feel like you have this wonderful opportunity to make the most of every single day. So literally, it's kind of crazy. But at the age of 9, with this pocket watch in hand and the words of the surgeon on my mind, I had this sense that I had been spared for a purpose. And so every single day of my life, I try very hard to live it as if it's my last. That's the truth. So I bring that into my relationships. I bring it into my human relationships, my family, and I bring it into my business relationships. I mean, I really try to treat every single interaction with a CEO or a C-suite executive with my undivided attention, with a sense of purpose, with a sense of obligation to help them get the most out of their business, the most out of their personal lives. And that's been my mojo, honestly. It's kind of putting, it's using your heart and your head, and it's really seizing the day and really seizing the moment to help somebody else.
It's an absolutely amazing story. And I've heard you tell it before. And the one time when you told it, the last time I'd heard it before this, you had been talking with my daughter's boyfriend. And that was the first time I heard you talk about the choice. It would have been really easy for you to do a woe is me move and just literally for the rest of your life, right? But because you were a great athlete, that wasn't going to happen as much as it could be for all these other things.
No, my batting average went down significantly.
Yeah, but you rechanneled things.
There's something about depth perception that's not a bad thing to have in sports, it turns out. But
right.
Doesn't matter as much in consulting, but it does in sports.
Yeah, it really started you on a path where you're using your big brain to help people, and you've just done an incredible job of it. It's super cool.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Wow.
No, I think it's right. And there are lots I think many people have stories like that. They don't always share them. I'm not the only one, obviously. And some people have even more horrible stories or more difficult circumstances. But I do think what's common in them is what you're after, what you're pointing out, which is making the decision, making the choice to really make the most of every single day, to feel like if you've survived something, then it's a gift and you're here, for a sense of purpose, and that you can pivot, what your strengths are from, in your case, it was figuring out how to use my brain, to make a living and to make a difference. Yeah. So it's good. It's a good life lesson.
It's amazing. I love it. Thank you. And I think it also shows that it ties back to our idea that business development is a learnable skill, that we've all got these choices all the time. And day in and day out, making the choice to attack it, to get better, to pick ourselves back up if something doesn't go our way, and all those kind of things, it feeds right into it. Yeah. If somebody's got a vision, like they want to become somebody like what you do, they can do that. But it's probably grit or persistence or perseverance that's probably more important than anything else, I would guess. So before we get into the content areas, I'm actually interested because I think it's a good bow on that story. I would guess you think, perseverance or grit or things like that are one of the most important elements for somebody to be successful. What's your just philosophy on that?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I think that's another lesson of that story. You're exactly right. There's sort of sense of purpose. There's sort of, leading with your heart and your head. There's, all of these things matter a great deal. I don't know. I don't know if I have a particular message on that front, but it matters a lot.
Okay. Well, let's dive into our content then. We've got 3 big chunks. Take the strategic perspective, more judo, less karate, and move without the ball. So I think the tie that we can do to take the strategic perspective and get your thoughts on what you do to do that with your clients is you wrote a really cool passage we worked together on in the snowball system, where you talked about how you have a very specific list of ideas you've got for the CEOs you serve, the organizations that you serve, and you feel by developing those, these are ideas they should be thinking about for their business. It puts you in a position to advise them. And you talked in the snowball system about how, as you write that list, you feel compelled to, it makes you feel compelled to share that. So why don't you pick up from there? Because I wanted to tie that together because so many people commented on that particular couple pages in the book, really found meaning in it. And I want to make sure that if you're listening or watching, they know you're the Mike that was in the book there. So sort of pick up from there and tell me, what does take the strategic perspective mean for you and how do you implement it?
Yeah, no, I think the first thing, Mo, is just honestly taking a strategic perspective. We'll talk about strategic first. But the higher order principle is taking the other person's perspective, right? So selling or compelling someone to do the right thing or to engage on a new idea or a new topic doesn't start with you pushing. It starts with you listening and taking their perspective. In the case of a CEO, CEOs have complicated jobs. They have a whole host of people concerns, but they have to chart the course for a company. They have to chart the strategic direction. What's my direction and what's the pace at which I need to move there? And so for 20 plus years as a partner, I've challenged myself, 23 years as a partner at BCG, I've challenged myself for every one of my clients to have a working view of what the CEO's strategic agenda should be. And I've often written at the top of the page, what would I do if I were fill in the name of the CEO? What would I do? And if you're consulting to, maybe you're not consulting to a CEO, maybe you're consulting to the head of marketing or the head of technology. It's the same exercise. What would I do if I were this person? And it requires actually a lot of thoughtfulness to really say, when you take that person's perspective and internalize it, it forces you to think very deeply about, okay, well, what should they be working on? And it's usually quite a broad agenda, right? I mean, I rarely come up with fewer than 20 things they should be working on. Then you have to go through the exercise of, well, what are the 3 or 4 that matter the most? So it's also an exercise of thinking broadly, but then thinking about the relative priority of what they should be working on. You then, and I write it down on a single piece of paper. So for every client that I serve, and I serve them, right? I'm there to help and serve them. I have a single piece of paper I carry around in my briefcase. And over time, it's become digital, but I have a piece of paper, and for that client, and I challenge myself to keep it to one piece of paper, right? Because it forces you, again, to get quite sharp on the issues that matter the most. And I record that, and over time, it evolves. I find myself scratching things out or erasing and adding, okay, now I got to start with a whole new sheet. I got to pull out the new sheet of paper, and because enough things have changed over 3 or 4 years. The other thing it forces you to do, Mo, is once you have that list, you have to think about, okay, that's great, you've got a list. Now, how do I like to use the word moving someone. How do I move someone from where they are today to either agreeing or disagreeing with my list, but to engaging on it? And if I really think there are important things they're working on that they're not, I have to move them. And I have to move them twice. I have to move them emotionally, and I have to move them intellectually. I have to do both. If I do one without the other, I'm probably not really going to move them. So the reason I like move is often used as an action word. I'm going to move someone, right? I'm going to move the ball forward. I'm going to move, whatever forward. But it's also moving, right? Moving someone emotionally. So I like that word because it's a reminder of moving people twice. And it's not easy. I mean, at the highest level, it takes persistence. You mentioned persistence in my as kind of the footnote story that resonated for you on my opening story. I think persistence is required. Like if you move someone but you're in a hurry, well, then you're being selfish, right? To move someone, you have to think about, how can I move them? How is it that they need to hear something? How is it that they learn? Who is it that they need to hear from? Is it me? Is it one of my colleagues? Am I the right person, or is it me plus someone else? How many meetings will it take for me to compel them that this is a hard thing to do, but the right thing to do, that they're missing something on their agenda, or sometimes just to encourage them? My agenda often overlaps with their agenda. So just to give them that courage, right? Not to change their mind, but to give them courage. So for every topic and every person, you have to really think about, what are the sequence of moves? I often call them Jedi warrior moves, right? It's kind of, you want to move people, but you have to do it with persistence. You have to do it with thoughtfulness. You have to think about the series of meetings, and you have to have the patience to do it sometimes over 12, 18 months. Some of the most important topics I've ever worked on for a client has taken me 18 to 24 months to get them ready to embrace the change. So that's what I mean, Mo, when I say strategic perspective. And it's an important place to start. If you're not starting there, then you're selling something. And that's just, that's not what we're here to do. I mean, we're not here to sell. I mean, we're all in business, we're all in business. So of course we, and even when you're not in business, you're selling something. You're selling an idea, you're selling a song, you're selling, but boy, if you're pushing a product or a service, then you're selling. If you're starting with their perspective back, then I feel obligated. I tell some of my young partners, I much like you, I teach a training class for young BCG partners, and they say to me, Mike, don't you feel? You sell a lot of work. Doesn't that feel kind of icky? And I feel icky. And I was like, no, it doesn't feel icky because I'm not selling anything. I'm not selling anything. What I'm doing is I feel every time I talk to a client, I feel, number one, it's an important topic because I've started with their agenda. I feel a moral obligation to move them, to compel them to do more, to be more ambitious, to go faster, sometimes to go in a different direction, sometimes just to reinforce the direction they're going on, but to do it faster or to do it differently. And I feel so empowered by that. So my final note on strategic perspective is it starts with the other. And when you start with the other, selling is the consequence of doing the right thing as opposed to the objective function. So I never set out to sell. Selling is simply the outcome of doing the right thing. And when you're doing the right thing, you have a moral compass and a sense of obligation to move people.
I absolutely love it. And I love how you've distilled it into a process, meaning you don't let these strategic ideas bounce around in your head and randomly maybe bring them up, maybe not. The fact that you get that piece of paper out and you write down the strategic imperative of that CEO, that organization, I've heard you talk about that makes you feel, as you write it down, that makes you feel compelled to talk to them.
Yes.
And then I also love how, we both know HBDI and the how to think in whole brain wave because we've worked together on that stuff. But if yellow is the strategy, then you talked about both moving them from a logical way and then an emotional way, and then having that dialogue. Obviously, I'm sure there's a practical next step that pops out of those conversations in one way or the other. So that gives you the fourth, the green. So you've got yellow idea, blue, red conversation, and then green. How do we actually do this together? And sometimes I know you're bringing ideas to them. They don't even need BCG to do, right? You just feel compelled to tell them, hey, there's this thing you should focus on. So I think you did it intuitively, but I think it's really neat how you used used a whole brain way of going about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. No, I love the HBDI. You're exactly right. It is whole brain. And yeah, it's funny, Mo, we just went through the partner here in Atlanta who manages our office now, a young partner, Rod Garcia Escudero.
Oh, I didn't know he's managing the office now. That's fantastic.
Yeah, he's now he's in his first year managing the office. It's a wonderful tradition. Every 6 years we pass that special role into the next generation. So it's wonderful for Rod to do that. And Rod went through an exercise recently. I'm not sure what he's going to do with it because he just did this, but he asked everybody to share their favorite music album from when they were growing up and like a favorite quote. And I'm busy, so I put off the email, and then Rod emails me back, you haven't responded, So I thought, okay, let's think about it. And what's the first thing that comes to your head? So my favorite album, I was kind of probably not unlike you, the geeky kid who listened to progressive rock in the 70s. So I thought, got it. It's Rush. It's the album Hemispheres. And the quote is, "The heart and mind united in a single perfect sphere." And I thought, that quote has always stuck with me. I didn't have to look it up. That's always stuck with me since I was 13-year-old teenager, angst-filled teenager. And it's so true for life and business, right? It's like this notion of, if I'm ever uncertain in a meeting or I'm uncertain in a business development situation or any place, if you just pause and listen to both the heart and the head, or the left and the right side, and your HBDI, the red and the the red and the green,
red and blue for heart and mind. Yeah,
heart and mind. So you listen to the red and the blue, and you rarely go wrong, right? If you really sort of take that holistic perspective of the other, it's just a good way out, because you don't have all the answers, right? In a meeting, you don't always have the answers. I've been doing this 30 years. So whenever I'm stuck, I just take a breath and I think about, what's my heart telling me and what's my experience. The head is about my cumulative experience. It's about, the analytical perspective and technical skill, but it's a lot about experience. And the heart is about, what does my gut tell me? What's the human thing to do here? How's this person feeling? Why are they asking that question? what's going on for them? How can I understand where they're coming from? And then I'll know how to answer this. Or maybe just not to answer it. Maybe to take that discussion out of the meeting. Right? So anyway, good plug for HBDI. I love that frame. Well, yeah, it's wonderful. It really is. It's guided much of my life. Before I knew the terms, I think, as you said, intuitively, that was a lot of my framework. So it was really reinforcing. And I think for those, it's one of the things too about it's a learned behavior. Like, for some people it's intuitive, but even if it's intuitive, it's nice to overlay a framework to sort of bring some, cohesive shared language to it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And those two opposing pairs of, the facts versus the feelings and the big idea versus how the heck we're going to get it done. I mean, somebody doesn't need to know HBDI, but if they can always think in those two opposing pairs, you're going to make every meeting better. You're going to make every comment better, things like that. And I've seen you in meetings, and you have an incredible ability to convey a very technical idea in a way that others can receive it. So you're flexing between these modes all the time, and it's pretty cool to watch.
Yeah.
All right.
Good.
Well, that was cool. And I do want to say this, folks, if people want to get a system for how to think about habits, like you've got this habit of writing things down and communicating with your clients in a way that's very proactive. Like you take it on yourself to do that. And we've got a free little mini course over at bdhabits.com that people can get. So let's move to the second big chunk of content. And I think this is, when I heard you say this before, I thought, oh, that's clever. And it drew me in. More judo, less karate. So tell me what you mean by that and dig in a little bit.
Okay. It makes me sound like I'm a martial arts expert, which I'm not, but I am a lover of metaphors. So here's the deal. There's a difference between judo and karate, right? And you don't have to be a martial arts expert to appreciate that karate is much more about being on the attack, right? And it's a set of moves, sort of front of foot attack moves. Obviously, there are defensive moves as well, but there's a lot of attack in karate. In judo, as I understand it, there is a lot of using the weight of the other against themselves. And so sometimes it's just getting out of the way, and it's movement in a defensive way that becomes offensive because you're using the movement and weight of the other and the position of the other to your advantage. So one is more forward and aggressive, if you will. The other is sort of letting things come to you. Okay, so with that metaphor in mind, one of the things I've observed, and I have the privilege, a real pleasure of teaching this, what we call Foundations program at BCG, which I do for one reason only. It's like it's one of the ways I give back to the institution, and it means a lot to me. There's no other real reason for me to do it. It takes several days a year, probably 4 days a year of my time, and in that I get to meet with a lot of young partners. And I often thought it must be like a professor getting to meet freshmen every year. There's something actually re-energizing. I've realized that while I do it is I'm reminding myself of certain lessons. And as I get better at articulating them and telling stories, it's reinforcing for me as well as helpful for them. Fine. So I started to observe in these trainings and also in some of the work I do with young partners, Mo, that they often, when they get elected a partner, much more of their life becomes about business development. And I noticed that their behavior becomes a little anxious. And so they will they think their job is I've got to push. I've got to push if I'm going to sell. We need to go faster. We need to have, Mike, it's been 3 days since the meeting. We need to have a follow-up meeting. When are we going to have the follow-up meeting? Then they'll get in the meeting. And what do they do in the meeting? Well, my job is to be really smart. So if I'm going to be really smart, I need to show them how smart I am. And the best way to show them how smart I am is to talk a lot and to have a really long PowerPoint deck. See my PowerPoint deck? You see how much thought went into this deck? You see how thick it is? It's a 100-page color PowerPoint document, double-sided. And I'm gonna take you through every page.
In that order.
That's gonna happen. I hope you did the pre-read, because if not, this is gonna be a long meeting, right? It's happening It's going down. I did all this work. And so they get in these meetings, they take 80% of the airspace. They fall in love with their slides, maybe with good reason, but that's ultimately selfish, isn't it? I'm going to show you how brilliant I am. I'm going to show you how incredible this analysis is. I'm going to walk you through every derived insight of every slide. That's what they do. And then they wonder why the meeting doesn't go as well as they thought it would. It didn't feel like, I don't know, I felt like, I don't feel like he was hearing me. They don't get it. We're going to have another meeting. We got to go harder. We got to go back at this again. And I'm like, stop, just stop, right? And I'll say to them, you're trying too hard, right? You're not taking their perspective. You're displaying anxiety. And that is not going to move anyone, which is why I wanted to tell the earlier story, right? That won't move anybody emotionally or intellectually. So let's rethink this whole thing. So sometimes the best thing to do in a meeting is to just talk a lot less and listen a lot more, right? It's about, and that's talking. Talking is karate. Listening is judo. Why? Because when I listen, I'm letting them come to me. They're coming to me. Because if I'm listening, it means they're talking. They're coming to me. They're sharing what's on their mind. Now that I know what's on their mind, maybe I can think about how to move them, how to pivot them in a different direction or agree with them. But you have to start. So talk less, listen more, less karate, more judo, fewer slides. Another example, my 100-page deck example is also judo and karate. Why do people feel, a long deck is a display of nervousness? Can I carry a conversation? Am I okay with white space in a conversation, right? So the deck is karate. The deck is, I'm bringing the deck. I'm bringing it, right? And judo is white space. How are you feeling? Mo, how are you? Tell me what's on your mind today. You've been working through COVID, like all of us. It must be really tough, for you in the grocery sector or you in the airline sector to be doing. How are you feeling through all this? How are your people? It's turning the dialogue into a conversation, and that's where good things happen. And by the way, when you're in a conversation, you know what happens? You co-create an answer. Yes. It's no longer me pushing my idea. It's me engaging you to get to a better place together. And when you do that, then generally people hire you, right? Because they believe in you. They believe that you're motivated by a higher calling, a sense of what is right for them. So that's judo and karate.
I love it. Well, I've got some follow-up questions on this. So,
sure.
Gosh, I was having this exact conversation with a senior executive just this week, and it was so fun. We were doing a training class, and we were talking about the importance of balancing asking great questions. Folks want a model for doing that. They can dig into the gravitas model and snowball system. But how do you ask great questions to get the other person to talk? And get them talking in a way that your examples were so good. Like they're deep. They get the folks talking about their own personal beliefs, what they're going through, their feelings, things like that. Those are the types of questions that tend to light up the pleasure center of our minds when we're excited to give an answer, as opposed to, how many, just a facts and figures kind of question. The other element is at some point we have to share our point of view to, help move people. So I'm really interested in how you balance those, and of course, context tells us a lot. One meeting would be very different than another, but when you think about karate and judo and the metaphor, how do you balance asking questions and getting the other side to talk versus sort of bringing your own perspective?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that, because you're exactly right. And you'll notice in each of these three lessons, there is a balancing act that's occurring. Right? within each three of the three lessons, but also across the three lessons. There's a balancing act that's occurring.
Yes.
So yeah, judo versus karate doesn't mean you should not ever use karate, number one. Of course, there are times when you should be front of foot, making a bold statement, having a point of view, right? My point about that is often people err on the side of too much karate. Not that both aren't important. They are both important,
Yes.
Number one. Number two, judo and that lesson is largely therefore about listening more, drawing out, asking questions. The strategic perspective is about having a point of view. It's not enough to just, so it would be a failure if all you did is, or if you took away from the lesson judo versus karate, I just got to go in and ask good questions. And if I do that, I'll move them. No, you also have to have a point of view for a variety of reasons. One is, if you're going to be a trusted advisor to anyone, you need to do the work. You need to do the work to have a value-added perspective on their business or their life, depending on what your role is. And that's work. I mean, it's work. I work hard at having an advantaged point of view that is well-informed, that is backed up by the facts. And I want to be right. I want to be well-informed, buttoned down on a thoughtful, experience-driven, data-driven point of view. And number one, I can't have a strategic perspective. I can't influence their agenda or do the morally obligated job of making sure there aren't gaps in their agenda, right? Unless I do that hard work. Now, that also means in a conversation, knowing when to pivot. When is it? So there's this art. It's an art of when do I ask questions? When do I ask a second or third question? When do I keep my mouth shut? Because today, my friend across the table from me needs to talk. He needs to be heard, and I can feel it. And when do you need to take a risk and actually put a point of view on the table? And it's a balancing act. You can't do one without the other in every meeting. Some meetings can be more about one than the other, but over a course of conversations, you're having a dialogue over a course of individual conversation. And there will be times when you absolutely must take a point of view. I will sometimes know one of the things works for me is I'll often, if it's going to be a tough one, I will at some point in the conversation let them know it's coming. Maybe even ask for permission. And I'll say, John, Bob, I have a few things. Mo, I have a few things that I think are really important we talk about today. And, I think a couple of them you're going to probably agree with, and you're going to, we can maybe compare notes on those. But I just want to share with you my perspective, and we can compare notes on those. But I have a couple of things that are going to be maybe hard to hear. And they may be a little bit hard to talk about. They might be hard for me to share, but I feel like if I'm not sharing them, I'm not doing my job. I'm not doing service to our relationship. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of permission to take a little bit of risk on a couple things, okay? And invariably, people, what I've done is I've changed their frame of mind. I've prepared them to have a serious conversation where I'm going to be saying something. I'm going to be using a little karate because I'm going to be taking a risk to put a perspective on the table. But I've let them know. And there's something that happens in the whole brain where people flip and they turn on their listening ears and they start asking me, well, tell me more about that, Mike. That's really an interesting perspective. Say more about why you feel that way. Now they're asking me. See, I've turned the conversation to get them ready to be in listening mode and to ask me questions. And that's really important. Again, that's why I call it, it's a real, again, it's not just it's not like it's a trick. This is an important thing to get people to be ready to hear. That's why I often use the Jedi warrior metaphor, which is, in the Star Wars movies, the Skywalker, family have when they're really in the moment, when they're really relaxed and zen, they can get the other person to say what needs to be said. That's the real art of a Jedi. They don't have to use force, and they have to be in a certain headspace. They have to be thinking of the other. They have to be right, and they can get the other person. These are not the drones I'm looking for, right? That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get the client to say, tell me more about that.
Yes.
Mike, I'm ready to hear you now. I'm ready to hear you. Tell me more. Tell me why. Tell me why you think that. Why do you feel so passionate? I can see it in your eyes. Why do you feel so strongly about this? Or, I'm not sure I agree with you, Mike. That's great. Right now, that's okay too. Yeah. I'm not sure I agree with you on that one, Mike. Let's talk about it. Let's debate this a little bit. Great. Let's do that. That's awesome. I've got them thinking. I've got them thinking deeply. I've got them thinking second and third order implications. I've got them taking a different person's perspective, and that is going to make them better, and it's going to make their business better.
Yes.
Consequence is people will retain you and your teams and your people to come help them again. So it's a really important, I think it's an important lesson. It starts with judo and karate, but it's about this balance between both and about a perspective and listening at the same time.
Oh yeah. This is super valuable. And I think one thing I've seen you do really well, and these are obviously internal meetings, not external meetings for you, but by asking questions first, you do an amazing thing intuitively, which is you learn the other person's position in their words and in their priorities. Yes. And then when you come back with your point of view, you're starting with their place as opposed to yours. And your example of the long PowerPoint, which I think is hilarious, and our whole audience is going to get it. Believe me, they're going to totally get it. When somebody goes and guns a-blazing with the 100-page PowerPoint, you're really using your words and your priorities, and in some cases could be perceived as jargon or things like that, as opposed to starting with them, which is what I've seen you do really well. Learn their words, their priorities, and then be able to talk about how you might be able to help them accomplish their goals, but you're using the way they talk about it, right, and showing your expertise as you do it. So I think there's a neat balance of how you start, which I think maybe is so intuitive you might not even realize that you do it.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's go into our third chunk of content, moving without the ball. So I think how you describe this is pretty cool, and I think the audience is going to get a lot out of it. So roll with it.
All right, moving without the ball. So Mo, as I think I shared with you, I am a proud Tar Heel. So I went for undergraduate, I went to Chapel Hill, and I was 1 year behind a basketball player who wasn't so well known at the time, a guy named Michael Jordan. And he was 1 year ahead of me. So he had actually become a little bit famous. I remember during my senior year in high school, right? We all remember that senior year in high school. You already know you're going to college, right? You're kind of excited about graduating. And it's March, 1982, and I'm watching the Final Four. And it was that game when Michael Jordan became a globally known person, sports figure, right? He was a freshman. People sometimes forget that. 1982, Michael Jordan was a freshman, Carolina, one of the few freshmen to ever start at Chapel Hill under Dean Smith. The first basketball player that Dean Smith ever allowed to go anywhere on the court he wanted to go and to break patterns, because he could see things happening on the court more quickly than Dean, the coach, could change the team. So Michael was already great, a great basketball player as a freshman. He became famous in the shot heard around the world when he, at the buzzer, makes the winning shot. They threw to the freshman in the final seconds of the game to make the winning shot of the national tournament. And at that point, everybody knew they were looking at a superstar. Great. So I got to go to college with this guy. We weren't friends, but I had the privilege of watching him, every college game during his sophomore year and his junior year. And then, as everybody knows, his senior year, he went professional with Chicago. And I can tell you the reason I like this story is twofold. One is I got to watch a lot of Michael Jordan basketball when he was young, and I got to see what he was capable of before he was in the NBA. And the second reason, of course, is, everybody's been watching The Last Dance on ESPN when we're all locked in our homes, unable to watch sports, and people have just been craving and binging on The Last Dance, which, of course, for those who haven't seen it, go watch it. But it's the story of Michael Jordan's last season, leading the Chicago Bulls to a 6th championship. Before that team then, went their separate way. The team broke up and the stars all went elsewhere. So with those two things in mind, Last Dance, me hanging out, camping out for tickets to watch Jordan play. What was special about Jordan? What made him an amazing college player and an amazing player his first 6 years in the NBA was he was an offensive threat. He was unlike when this guy had the ball in his hands, it was magic. I mean, even as a sophomore in college, a scrawny Michael Jordan, there was nothing he couldn't do with the ball. If he had the ball, he was going to score. I mean, it was just unbelievable. The jumping ability, the way he would move in the air, an offensive threat. But Michael Jordan did not win another championship until his 7th year. Pretty sure it was the seventh year in the NBA. What changed? What changed is Michael Jordan went from being the best offensive player in the world to the best complete basketball player in the world. And what was required of him to do that was to think beyond just scoring when he had the ball. It was, what did Michael Jordan do when he didn't have the ball? It was his ability to move on the court when he didn't have the ball. It was his ability to put other players in position to score selflessly. It was no longer about Michael having a 50-point game. It was about giving up the ball. It was about giving the ball to others. It was about moving on the court as a decoy so others would be open. And so for me, there's a really powerful lesson in that, which is he was perhaps the greatest basketball player, for those first 6 years that the NBA had seen, but he truly became the best when he learned to move without the ball. And so what does that have to do with, business development or relationship development? And I think the lesson here, Mo, is if you're building a sustained relationship with anyone, it's not just about the things that you do. It's not just about what you do in a proposal meeting. You've got the ball. They requested the proposal. You got an RFP. You've got the ball. You got to put it on the court. You got to shoot to score. You got to say the right things. You've got the ball in a proposal situation, right? And that's great. You better be able to score in those. You're not always gonna make the shot, but you better be trained. You better practice. You better be well rehearsed to win in the moment. But the biggest things, the most important pieces of work I've ever done have not been responding to RFPs. They have been the things I have done on the court, in the boardroom, to position BCG to be the right partner to help them on something really important, right? It's about creating opportunity for the client and for BCG. And that's a whole different game. That's a whole different thing, right? It's hard work and takes a lot of practice and talent to win when you've got the ball, to win when you're in a proposal situation or in a competitive situation. But when you get to a place where you are moving on that court, when you're taking the strategic perspective and you're moving them, then you're asked to do things for the client. They're not competitive. They're not RFPs. The conversation's quite different. It is, Mike, you've been so helpful in X, Y, and Z. Could you work with us on this? Right? Or it's going to the client and say, we've been talking a lot about this topic for the past year and a half. I think we're at a point where we should talk about working together on this. And would it help if I were to go away and craft a couple of options for how we might help you? I'm not sitting around waiting for an RFP, and it's not about selling. I'm not sitting around waiting because I can't wait, because this topic is so important. They have to be working on this, right? It goes back to the strategic perspective. And again, it's a little bit of the judo and karate. Moving with the ball is karate. Judo is about moving without the ball, right? So these themes cut across one another. And, surely surely if you're going to be doing the right thing, it almost by definition has to be not just in response to a need, but into identifying a need, maybe identifying it before others do, and then helping them to understand the urgency of the need, and then crafting with them, co-creating with them a response that will better position them to be successful. Right? And then business comes, whatever. Business comes, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does, but more often than not, it does. But it's business and selling is not, again, as I said earlier, is not the objective function. It's the consequence of doing all these things well. Scoring when you've got the ball, moving to put the client in the right position when you don't have the ball. It's the judo, it's the karate, it's the listening, it's the taking a tough perspective, and starting with the client.
Well, obviously you can see me grinning from ear to ear because the whole world needs this message. When we work with clients, I'm thinking habits because that's this season's theme. And I think of the great little mini course over on bdhabits.com. The two major pieces of that to help people start out in this journey to get to the level of proficiency that you've got. You do this intuitively. We've talked about it, right? You don't necessarily need lists and writing, although you do in some ways. But the point I'm trying to make is the two major ways we typically help people in the beginning move without the ball is to have a list of commercial opportunities that are either in play or should be. And that's what we're thinking about. How can I proactively move that forward? We call that an opportunity list. And a lot of times people will have something like that already. Not everybody, but usually at least they think about it. Moving without the ball is totally different though. I've never worked with a client, and this is over 400 of them, that they had some type of list just thinking about the relationship. So as you know, we call that a protomoi list. It's a Greek word. It means first among equals. But it's trying to help people realize that if they write down their list of their first among equals relationships, their most important relationships to them, and think about every week, every day maybe. I've got clients that stick their protomoi list on their wall on a whiteboard. So I have another client that actually puts their photos instead of names. So they get they're connected to Jane and Phil and Kareem and whoever. But the idea of getting those relationships on paper and thinking about a dual process where, of course, one is a little more transactional, opportunity driven, but the other one's just like, how can I help people? Because I want to help them and they're really important to me. And there may not be they might not even have a job right now, but they're so important to me for other reasons that, or I know they will at some point be in a position to hire us that I'm going to invest in that person, that relationship. And you do this so darn well, so intuitively. You don't necessarily need to write it down, but I'm interested in your thoughts on how you juggle in your mind the sort of opportunity path in this relationship or this more orchestrated move without the ball path. How do you, go.
No, it's a great question. And I think you're right. It's like most things in life. And I know you're a big believer in the power of practice and the ability to learn new behaviors. And it's so true. And, like most behaviors, when you first try a new behavior, it feels awkward, right? And you have to actually work a little harder. You have to write it down, right? You have to have the disciplines of writing the right and all that. And over time, I think as you become more practiced at something, it does become more intuitive. You have more confidence. That said, as I've reflected a lot about this, Mo, that said, I do feel like a lot of it's intuitive. And I will find myself just mentally, periodically pausing to kind of almost tick through the relationships in my head, right? And who do I need to spend more time with than I haven't? But usually when I'm doing that, I'll usually end up in my own way. I'll pull out the piece of paper and I'll sit there. I'll be like, I need some quiet time. I need a half an hour. I'll block it in my calendar. I regularly block time in my calendar. And, and I'll scribble out those names, of the most important relationships. And I'll just kind of take stock of, okay, who have I talked to recently? Who haven't I talked to in a while? How are those people doing? Who would benefit from a handwritten note or a quick email, or a phone call or a Zoom call? And so while it is a little bit more intuitive and to me, it's like fluid, it's like a constant it's just very, very fluid, sort of ongoing, infinite process for me. But even now, with a lot of practice, I still have those moments of pause where I'll just quietly reflect, and then make adjustments and make very specific actions based on those reflections, right? I may not have it in a notebook and I don't put it in my Outlook, but I write it down and then I fire off an email to my assistant. Can you schedule the following 8 meetings with me? I'll add it to my to-do list. I got to write the following notes or emails. Boom, 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 boom. In fact, funny you say that right here. It's on my desk today, right here. This is not planned. And it had to go to the back of I use index cards. So it's Mike's to-do list. And on the back of this to-do list, email Jim, the president of a certain company. Send Arnold, CEO of a large travel company. Email Rich Lesser, CEO of BCG. There's a whole list. Email Calvin, the executive vice president of a certain client. There's literally a list of these. There's no specific business purpose. They're people that are on my mind for one reason or another, and I feel like I owe them something. In some cases, it's content. Actually, 3 of these are content. One person here is I arranged a private meeting between 2 CEOs, and they agree. Both are excited about it, but I now feel responsible for that being a successful meeting. So I'm not going to let that meeting. The meeting's on the books. I could move on to the next thing. I want that meeting to be great. So I'm going to email each of them individually with a list of topics that I would talk about if I were them, right? So I guess the moral of the story is, yes, it's much more intuitive. I have a lot of confidence on what to do and how to do it. I'm not always perfect, but ultimately I still have those quiet times where I record it to paper. And my encouragement would be for people starting out is to be even more disciplined about committing it to paper, right? I guess those are the two lessons here.
No, I love it. And I've seen you in action internally, externally, just with mutual friends. And you do an incredible job of always thinking, how can I be helpful to this person? And, you've been head of strategy for the company that invented strategy. So you're strategic about that. You're not spreading it like peanut butter and just investing in every person you meet randomly. You're very focused on the folks that probably are the end of the spectrum, the folks that you need to help, and the folks that or the folks who could help you. In other words, they can purchase things. But also, I've seen you be ridiculously generous with your time for just folks that need your help, and there's no real expectation or ability, at least in the short term, to have that be commercial or anything like that. So you do a really nice job of doing this intuitively, but it was helpful to hear you do have a bit of a process around this. I do. It may not be every Friday at 3:32 p.m., but
no, that's what's organic about it. That's what I mean by it's fluid and organic. There is a process, and there is writing stuff on paper, but it's not like I'm not the sort of person that's like, okay, every Friday at 8 a.m. is my time to do.
Yep.
No, it's like it's always in my head. There's always a dialogue in my head about the people in my life that I care about. On the home front, but obviously the work front. That's where I spend 10, 12 hours a day. It's a constant dialogue, And something will trigger it. I'll be in a conversation. I'll be, I gotta send a note to that person. I gotta follow. I'll look at my calendar. Oh, Jim is meeting with, Jim's got that meeting next week. I need to email him this weekend to make sure it's a flawless meeting, right? So it's more like I see it and then I reflect, I'll take a note, and then I'll also have some quiet time. Yep. So it's organic. A little bit of organic and a little bit of planning.
I love it. Well, and to put a bow on that last topic, I want to say this again. It's okay for Mike to do that and to make it organic. But man, if you're learning these skills, you really need to have a disciplined approach about it. You've got to have time.
You do. No, I'll tell you this.
Write down a list of names and things like that. So, well, let me put a bow on that. And then I want to look to you for a little inspiration. You've actually been inspirational for me. So I haven't given any inspiration in the inspirational part of our show before, but I'm going to actually do that. So I'll do that. And then I'm going to kick to you for the final thought. You actually got to me on the Father's Day thing. So very tactically, folks, if you want to learn these types of skills, then go to bdhabits.com, B for business, D for development, bdhabits.com, because there's a toolkit there that helps you in the best proper way possible write down your opportunities, write down your relationships with forms and worksheets and protocols around how to do that, when to do it, and everything. So you can build a habit around it and get to the point where Mike is. My inspirational close is, we're taping this on Father's Day. And Mike, I hadn't thought of it until you brought it up. But when I was growing up, I felt tremendous pressure. He didn't put it on me, but I felt tremendous pressure to be a great basketball player. And because my dad is and still is, he's going to be 84 in a few days. And he's an incredible basketball player, to the point that at 84 years old, he can hit typically 90 out of 100 3-pointers from varying spots around the arc. So his goal is each year to hit his age out of 100. So imagine a great shooter might hit 40% or 40% a game, 65% in practice, something like that. My dad at 84 can hit 90 sometimes. His best ever is 93 out of 100. So, and that's 3-pointers. But when I was growing up, I felt like I needed to be great at basketball. Not because he ever said to, but because he cast a long shadow, if you will. I know you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But the thing I remember that's so important, and I think our audience could learn from this, and I know I can. Whenever I would ask him, what should I do next? I thought he would say things like, well, work on your left-handed crossover dribble from going from left to right or whatever. I thought he'd give me a technical thing. He never did. I probably asked him that 100 times. He only had one answer: go out and practice. That's all he ever said. It was maddening. Yeah. Like sometimes I go, no, I get that. But what should I practice on? He's like, just go out and practice. Practice. Keep at it.
Yeah.
And I thought when you started talking about Father's Day today, I thought of that, and I thought, what a great lesson I learned from my dad. I'll see him in a couple hours. I'm going to thank him for it. That he actually would have done me a disservice if he would have said, work on your left-handed crossover. But he kept hammering that message home. If you want to be good at something, you practice.
That's great.
And I think that's true in business development skills. If somebody wants to get great at it, they just need to start doing it. They need to practice. So that's my inspiration. You inspired me to share it. Give us your thoughts when you think about taking the strategic perspective, more judo, less karate, moving without the ball. I absolutely loved everything you shared today. What thought would you want to leave folks with that can linger for a bit? Yeah.
First of all, I've seen the video of your dad winning a basketball tournament, three-pointer.
Yep.
The man is a machine. He is a gifted basketball player at any age. So it's great. It's a great story. And practice does make perfect. I guess I would, Mo, end it here, which is I am often asked by I do something with my various teams that I work with. I have fireside chats, and it's an hour and a half with Mike. And there's no content agenda. It's the 23-year-old associate right out of college can ask anything on their mind. And the question I've been doing a lot of them in COVID world. So we've been doing Zoom fireside chats. And I've been struck by the question unprompted that it's most asked of me, which is, tell me how it is that you're so successful building relationships with such senior clients for so many years, so many different clients. What's the secret? And I just look at them and I say, well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about. So I'm going to ask you, Mo, to think about this. I'm going to ask everybody who's watching to think about this. Think about the 2 or 3 most successful relationships in your personal life. Right now, think about it. Could be your wife. Could be your father. Probably a close friend or a handful of really close friends. And you know the difference between the friend and really close friends, maybe that have been with you for a long time in life, a wife who's been with you for 30 years, a parent who sacrificed. The best, if you had to think, what are the most successful human relationships I have in my personal life? If you think about those, and then you think about the things that you do or they do to make them successful, what would they be? What would they be? I'm going to list a couple. I'm going to ask you to list one. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to start. So one of them is empathy. Empathy. You have to really, really think about how is the other feeling. A lot like the strategic perspective, isn't it? But it's about empathy. We wouldn't use the word, I've got a strategic perspective with my wife or my best friend from college. It is, I'm empathetic. I'm thinking about what's happening in their life. I'm thoughtful. The stuff you learn in kindergarten. I'm thinking about the other person. I'm a good listener. In my best relationships, when they're at their best, I'm a good listener. I'm really listening to them. How are you feeling? What's going on today? What happened in your life today? Tell me about it. But I don't just listen. I tell them like it is. And sometimes my wife doesn't like it, or my best friend. And sometimes I do it the wrong way. I'm probably more perfect at it in business than I am in personal life, but I do it. I'm doing it from the right place. I'll tell somebody the truth. And I might do it with a degree of compassion. I might do it sensitively. I might do it when I think they're ready to hear it. But if they ask me my opinion, I'm going to tell them. And you know what? Even though they don't always like it, they come back for more because they know I'm always going to tell the truth, and they know I'm always going to have their back, and I'm never going to be doing it in a judgmental way. I'm going to be doing it in a helping way. And it actually requires asking for feedback. That's really hard to do. That was something very hard for me to do. And I think I've gotten better in my human relationships when I was able to accept the fact that I am imperfect at a lot of things. And that once you accept that, you get very comfortable asking, how could I have done that better? Is there anything you would have done differently? I think that knowing that you're imperfect requires maybe the greatest gift you can give someone other than love is forgiveness. So to really own mistakes also requires accepting the mistakes of others. And if you accept the mistakes of others, you have to learn to forgive them, right? So it's forgiving them, it's forgiving yourself. And then two final, let me pause there because I have two that I'm going to close with. But do you have any, what's in your best relate?
Well, I thought of a couple.
Yeah.
Folks.
Give me one or two.
I thought of, two things you haven't mentioned. So hopefully I don't steal your last two.
No, it's okay. I'll have another one.
The two I thought of was there's a lot of frequency. So there's a frequency. There's a certain amount of volume of interactions. It's hard to have your best relationships and you haven't talked to somebody for 5 years. There's a lot of proactive mutual benefit of sharing information and ideas and checking in. Sort of goes in both directions. The other thing that popped in my mind was it's fun. When I think of my best relationships, it's fun to be in the relationship. It's fun for that person. It's fun for you. You're celebrating each other's incremental successes, the little things that go right. It's just light. It's heavy when it needs to be heavy, but a lot of times it's just a joy to be around. You look forward to it, if you would.
Yes.
So back to you. What are your last couple? I'm curious.
I love that. I love the frequency. I have a footnote on that. I have a friend, and I know we're about out of time, but I have a friend that we went a number of years seeing each other without a regularity, but we were always close. He's my daughter's godfather, very close for 30 years. But about 10 years ago, we decided that wasn't enough. So we have something we call First Sundays. The first Sunday of every month, we spend an hour doing a video call, just the two of us, once a month for 10 years. So First Sundays, remember that brand and think about the person in your life that you need more frequency with, right? Yeah. So my closing thoughts are around, two things. One is just vulnerability. I think my best relationships in my human life, you are willing to make yourself vulnerable and the other person is willing to make themselves vulnerable. That is also true in my client relationships. I know that my relationship is at the highest level it can achieve because there are levels in a relationship with clients, just as surely as there are in our personal lives. And when I'm at a place with a client where I'm comfortable being vulnerable and they are, sometimes that's professionally vulnerable. It could be something in your personal life. When you're willing to share at that level, you have truly become a trusted, not just an advisor, but a trusted advisor. So trust comes from vulnerability and these other attributes. And then finally, reciprocity, great relationship. My best relationships have an element of reciprocity. But the very best actually go beyond reciprocity. It's helping just for the sake of helping, not helping because you want something in return. So the power of reciprocity and then post-reciprocity is what I call it, right? You just do it because it's the right thing to do. And because when you do the right things in life, good things happen. So guess what? I've just given you my secret. If you do all of those things, if you treat your clients, if you at least aspire to build a relationship that is of the same or similar quality to your best relationships in life, the business takes care of itself. That's the beautiful thing. That happens. So there you go. That's my closing message.
I loved it. And I think what's super interesting about it, and this was in there, but I want to pull it out as the ending. You just said, if you think of your healthy, most friendly, helpful, fun, deep relationships in life, and think of what you do there, and just do that with clients. Like someone else would have a similar list, they might be reordered or whatever. But if whatever works for them authentically and genuinely, a lot of times with clients, we can think, well, I can't be vulnerable, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. And I love your message that just be you. Find out what works for you in your deepest, most healthy, wonderful, thriving relationships. Just do that with your clients.
Yes.
That will turn out really well for you. Is your message.
That's the beautiful thing.
How fun is that? That's a great message. Right. So people can be like Mike. I guess
they can do it without being exactly like Mike. It's like,
that's right.
Oh, you're right. That's the real message. Be your authentic self and practice these best behaviors and good things happen.
I love it. Mike, this has been, I had high expectations. It's been way, way, way better than that. I loved your thoughts on each of those three content areas, taking the strategic perspective, more judo, less karate, move without the ball, I think was my actually favorite of the three if I had to pick. They were all so good. And I think what's neat is we've sort of summed up by saying, you're this person that's operating at from my perspective, probably at one of the highest levels of any client relationship person in any organization we've ever worked with. And that can be off-putting, but I think you've broken it all down and given some inspiration at the end that says you can do this too. And I think that's sort of the coolest way to end it. So thank you so much for this. Have a great Father's Day. You've done an amazing job with your 3 kids and your many pets over there at the other in-town farm in Atlanta. And I hope I can see you guys soon.